that, let's give a warm round of applause to Julian Mensch.
Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Julian, and I make video games. I don't make video games in the traditional way that I'm sure a lot of you are used to thinking of. I work for NOAA, which is the federal government. So obviously our focus is a little bit different. We're focused on education and outreach and the use of all this data that we're producing. So we have these big climate and weather models that run, we have global observations, we've got satellites and ships and planes and all kinds of stuff. And our goal is to bring that science to you, to the public. So I've been with NOAA for about 5 years now, and I've been also doing some side projects. And first of all, let me show you just a couple of quick screenshots of the NOAA stuff. TerraViz is our major tool for data visualization. And this is where it's a little bit like Google Earth, except that it's designed for very voluminous data, and it's designed for data that changes in time. And we've also added a few bells and whistles and things that I'll show you later. Now on the side, I've been doing some other things. A couple examples here. I've been creating training simulations. So this one at the top is for the city of New York. This is disaster preparedness training. I've been working on architectural visualizations, something which I'll talk a little bit about later. And also more traditional games. This one was a marketing game for an unnamed car company. And that stuff has been really fun, really exciting. And I've also been doing some teaching. I've taught over at CU. I hope to teach here at DaVinci, do some summer camps for kids. And I just decided that stuff was so fun, so interesting, that I was going to sadly leave NOAA and pursue it full time. So this summer, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm making the big plunge. So a lot of these things that I've mentioned, you may be asking yourself, are these really games? I mean, they don't sound like games to me. And you're right, they're not traditional games. But I think what we consider a traditional game has gotten a little bit fuzzy. It's not quite as clear-cut as it once was. So let's start off talking about what you would think of as traditional games. And for most folks, that means console games. Maybe it means games on your PC at home. Now these games have been around for a long time. The first, what you could call a game, was 1959, back on the old supercomputers that were bigger than a room. And games really started to gain their own around the 1970s. We started to have the first commercial success for games was actually not the games in your home, it was arcade games. So these were big boxy machines you'd go and you'd play and stick quarters in and play with your friends. And about the same time, we started to see games enter the home space. The first games were nothing more than glorified joysticks that you would attach to your TV. But we did start to get microprocessor games. We started to get the Atari and the NES. And we had these generations of game consoles, that they called them. So when things started off, everything was 8-bit. And then it jumped to 16-bit, and then it jumped to 32-bit, and now we're at 64-bit games. And when they started out, they had 16 colors. And then all of a sudden, they had 256 colors. And so all of these metrics kept improving with each generation of consoles. And we've actually had about 7 generations so far. So we've come quite a long ways. We're about to enter the 8th generation, that they call, of console games. And if you think that conservatively, the power and the graphics and everything else doubled with each generation of games, we've really come a long ways. And recently, something happened in 2007 that was really a game changer for computer games and games in general. Does anyone know what that was? Any guesses? Fairly recent, 5 years, give or take. The release of the iPhone was a major game changer. And that was not long after that video games actually became the largest entertainment industry in the world, depending on what metric you want to use. So they have passed music, they have passed Hollywood, they are a behemoth. And just to kind of put that in perspective, to give you some numbers, games roughly make $50 to $70 billion a year worldwide. Hollywood, by contrast, makes about $10 billion. This is just the theaters and sort of the big productions. This isn't all the associated, the DVD sales and all that kind of stuff. But it's still a difference that you wouldn't think. You wouldn't think that games were so huge. You hear about, movies like Avatar. Avatar was incredible. Avatar, in about 17 days worldwide, it made $1 billion. I mean, the return on investment, you spend a couple $100 million, 2 weeks later, hey, I got $1 billion back. That's pretty good business sense right there, right? Now, you have to compare that to some of the most popular games that have been out there. And the most popular franchise has been Call of Duty. Raise your hand if you have heard of or have played Call of Duty. All right. So Call of Duty is not an individual game. It's a series. So Call of Duty Ghosts, that's the one, made $1 billion in 24 hours. One day. And this was out of this world, but it was only a little bit better than the previous Call of Duty, which was only a little bit better than the previous. So you're talking about, in one day, one game made 1/10 of the money that Hollywood makes in a year. So Hollywood is definitely starting to take games a little bit more seriously. And games are expanding in a lot of different ways. We have the mobile games, and with that has come this concept of free to play. And why would I give my game away for free? That makes no sense. I don't make any money. The idea is that I reel you in, I suck you in. So I give you the game for free, but there's this really cool thing you want to do in the game, and you need this special item to get there, and that item costs 99 cents. And you really want to look good. You're hanging out with your friends. You can get this really rockin' sword that glows and flames and is wonderful, and that's another 99 cents. So that's become part of the business model. And it's been a rocky road. There's a lot of anger in the community about some of the early games. They essentially became pay to win. So the idea being that you would pay to skip the grind and to get the extra good gear, and if you had enough money, you would always win the game. It's not really a fair way to play. So they started shifting that back a little bit, and they're saying, okay, really what we're going to do is we're going to say, if you don't have the time investment, we'll allow you to skip parts of the game. So we won't give you anything that you couldn't get by playing for free, but we'll help you get there a little bit faster because you're a young professional or you're somebody who's retired. You really don't want to spend a ton of money playing a ton of time playing games, but throw in a couple bucks here and there, that works fine. So we had that idea come through. Sorry, I lost my place here. We've also had, that goes along with the idea of microtransactions. So you can have a game that is free to play in the sense that I can play it but past a certain point. If I want to get to the advanced levels, if I want to get to this other content, I have to pay money, in which case it's sort of a preview. And on the other hand, if I want to get gear, you do microtransactions. That's the 99-cent thing. So games have become quite an enterprise. There's a lot of money into them. And the big thing that I want to talk with you this evening is how do we go about building a team and putting together a game? It's something that both big studios do, in which case they may have hundreds of people, and it's something that folks do on their own or in small teams of a couple. We actually have a lot of little studios right in the Boulder area. There are over 40 studios. So this is kind of a rocking place to be making games. So let's talk about some of the roles that go into creating games. And it's really hard to split things out, just because there's no real way to say this is one job description, this one is completely different, there's no overlap. In most gaming companies, people will wear a couple of hats. And a lot of the time, design kind of overlaps into the production, and art kind of overlaps into the programming. And so the way that I've split these out is by roles, by an individual hat you might wear. But don't think that these are hard or fast rules. So we're going to talk about the design phase. We're going to talk about visual assets, visual art for your game, 3D assets, which may not be in all games. There are a lot of very popular 2D games, but are important for others. Other types of assets. Really?
Restart it.
50-50 chance there. All right, programming, which is kind of the meat and potatoes, making your world move. And then production, the less sexy part, but actually getting your game produced and licensed and out to the masses. So starting off with design. first thing you got to do when you want to come up with a game is come up with a concept. And so this is the point where you paint things in broad brushstrokes. What world is my game going to take place in? Is my game going to be in the real world? And if not, how does it differ from the real world? Is it a world of magic? Is it a world of technology? What are the races? What are the major political parties? So concept designers look at the big pictures of games. And once you're through with that, you want to start focusing in a little bit. And there's a lot of design. You want to design technology if that's your thing, magic if that's your thing. I bring up characters because characters are very important to games. Because characters are always right in front of your camera. I mean, your character is yourself. It's your bridge into that game. And characters are the way that you interact with the game a lot of times, with NPCs, with enemies that are attacking you. You know, we are people, we are social creatures, and that social aspect is so very important to us. Next up, you want to start putting together some concept art. So what does the world of your game look like? Can anyone identify from the tiny little screenshots what game this is from? Probably not, but some of you may be just that nerdy. This is the limit breaks from Final Fantasy VII. So in designing these games, they don't just happen. You don't just sit down and start programming and start creating art. There's a long process that you go through and multiple iterations where you kind of have to sell it to the team. This is what I think should happen. So that's that phase of concept art. Scripts. Not all games have them, but they are very important. We love stories. Stories are so important to us. Stories are oftentimes how we remember things. You know, we don't necessarily easily recall a bunch of facts that we learned in a math class, but I can tell you a story about that time that Bob and we went out, and I can remember minute little details of the time that Bob and I had. So that's kind of how our brains are wired to work. And you don't think about how often there are stories in your life. I mean, we have stories on TV, we have stories in games, sure, but we have stories in almost every game, even when they don't necessarily make sense. I mean, Angry Birds. Angry Birds is a game where you throw birds at pigs. It doesn't need any story, but they felt the need to include this backstory, that the pigs have stolen your eggs and that's why you're attacking them. So, okay, now I feel that I'm doing a moral deed. This is retribution. So you see this pop up in a lot of games, and it's really, it's a skill that's kind of undervalued and underappreciated. Next up, we have level design. What is the space in which your character is going to be interacting with the game? And level design seems easy. I mean, we think about, cool, I'm going to put together a town, and I'm going to put together a boss, and I'm going to put together some traps and whatever else in my game. But it's actually very hard to give the player an illusion that they can go anywhere in their game. But in reality, you want them to go one specific place. And I'm sure you've all played games where it kind of hits you over the head. Hey, you're going to go in this direction, and I'm going to make you go in this direction. And that's not very fun. And you've also played games where you enter a world, and okay, where do I go? I have no idea, and you start wandering off into the sunset, and well, that's the end of that game. That was really boring. So it's this fine balance. You want the world to feel open, but you don't want the person to get completely lost, and you also don't want to beat them on the head to go the right direction. So just a couple of examples from games. This bottom one is Sonic the Hedgehog, the old 2D side-scroller. And this is a section of the very first zone that your player goes through. Notice that there's not one path. There's actually, at any given point, there are 3 or 4 paths. And there are areas that encourage you to go off and explore. It doesn't actually get you to the end of the level, but it rewards you for doing something a little bit different, for spending more time with the game. This is a game that is eminently replayable. I can go back and forth through it. I can play this level 10 times and take 10 different paths. But really, I mean, this whole thing is a few hundred pixels tall. These levels are tiny. They feel vast, and that is good level design. But really, at every point, I am controlling you and holding your hand and telling you where you're going to go. The top right is, this is a design for a medieval game, and it's way too small to see any of the notes here. But this is the idea of multi-level design. You have to think in 3D. So we have something that traditionally we would think of as 2D, the feudal era. It's not skyscrapers. But in this map, we've made use of tunnels underneath We've made use of walls, we've made use of courtyards, we've made use of towers. So we've really used that 3D space well. And over the top left, this is about the art and the design of making spaces feel distinct. You want people, when they travel from place to place in your world, to feel like they've traveled. So if I go from New York to Paris, it's not going to look like New York anymore. This is from, can anyone name the game? Hey, there we go. Team Fortress, the second one. So this is the red versus blue bases. And the little note here, they tried to make them not only different in color, but different in the way they feel. The red base is made of wood and organic materials. The blue base is industrial. It has a lot of right angles. It's very cold. And so it's just that subtle feeling that, yeah, now I've traveled. I'm somewhere different. So we already hit on this a little bit earlier, but storyboarding. We actually go through our games, and just like they do in Hollywood, we mark scene by scene what we want to do and how we want it to happen. And the reason that we go through and storyboard and we do all these steps rather than just going in and creating the game is that when you build games, you are going to fail. You're going to do something that is annoying to players, something that's confusing, something that just doesn't work. And the idea is to fail faster. Always, always fail faster, because it's going to happen. So as soon as possible, I want to get my ideas sketched up quick on paper and run it through the team. So that if there are any missing plot holes, any of those kinds of things, we can identify them as soon as possible, and we haven't wasted months actually building this game, only to realize that we have to throw a lot of it away. So all of that is just the initial design, getting the concept of the game putting together, deciding what we want to do. Now we actually have to sit down and create the game. And we start with visual art, graphic art, illustration. So these are people that are what we would think of as more traditional artists. So folks that paint, folks that draw. And they're going to create the marks, the flags, the symbols, the icons, those pieces of your game. Now on the flip side, we have texture artists. And texture artists go through and they look around at the world and they say, why does wood look like wood? How do I make something look like wood? Well, wood has grains. Okay, so there's some color information associated with it. Wood has a roughness. Light looks a certain way on wood. Maybe wood has been polished, so there's a bit of shininess. Maybe we have rust on an object. So it's kind of trying to go through and create a realistic world. We have GUI Design. And GUI is just, there's two things about GUI. On the one hand, GUI is how your user interacts with the world, how they tell the world what they want to do. And conversely, GUI is how the world tells your user what's happening, what their health is, what they need to know to enjoy the game. Now we have all this visual art, but oftentimes we are limited by the platform we're on. Your mobile phone is not as powerful as your PC at home, and your PC at home is probably not as powerful as your PlayStation or whatever other device. There's limitations anywhere you go, so there are specific artists whose job is to make sure everything runs smoothly, to downsample things and try and keep them looking as good as possible, to reduce the fidelity of models. Maybe for cinematics we have higher resolution, but for in-game we have lower resolution, those kinds of things. And that neatly slides into the 3D aspects, which most games, not all games, but most games use. So we start with the 3D modeling. And can you raise your hands and tell me if you know what 3D modeling is? Some? Okay. So just a real quick introduction. 3D modeling is a way to visualize things in 3D. And the way that we do this is we start with a series of points. We put those points around the edge of the object, and then we connect those with triangles. The triangle is the simplest shape I can possibly come up with. It's 3 points. And all we do is we simply create a point out of triangles on the surface, and then we can use that in the 3D game. So we have our 3D modeling as our first stage, and then we want that stuff to move. So we have 3D animation. And there are a few different ways to do this. Traditionally, it's been done with skeletons and muscles and a little bit of physics. So you'd move the skeleton of your character and their hand would move with it. As we've moved on, we've started to take some cues from Hollywood and do motion capture, which has actually gotten quite impressive. There are libraries online, and people will do their own custom, just like you'd see in a Hollywood film. The latest Call of Duty, Unfortunately, I don't have time to show you guys everything, but there's a fun visual. They were doing motion capture on a horse. So they had lights all along this horse on a treadmill running in a warehouse to get a part of this game where you're mounted.
Hey, I'm Tyler, and I'm going to tell you about Face Plus, the latest technology from Mixamo. Isn't that right? Face Plus is a revolutionary new animation tool for developers to create high-quality facial animations for 3D characters using only an off-the-shelf webcam or pre-recorded video. Face Plus works with both blend shape and bone-driven characters. A Unity plugin is available to record facial motion capture data in real time directly into the editor. Animations can also be edited after they're recorded. Face Plus is offered as part of Mixamo's all-access subscription. Oh my God! To learn more about Face Plus and the other development tools we have available, visit us online at mixamo.com/allaccess. Ciao. Adjustments to the animations can also be made after the recording. Face
Our 3D models and our characters, we need to fill out our world. And so we had our level design earlier. This is level creation. Let's bring that to life. How many people here have heard of League of Legends? Okay. So for those of you that haven't, this is a new genre of game that's come out, and there's a bunch of different names. The most common one I've heard is a multiplayer online battle arena. It's kind of like very violent sports, basically. You have two teams, and you're trying to get to the other person's goal line, essentially, and in the meantime, you're killing each other. That's just how it goes. Very popular. This is the most popular game out there today. This game actually was based on a couple of earlier iterations, and the original concept was someone took Warcraft 3, which was a more traditional strategy game. So you build buildings and these produce units, and you go out with your armies and battle each other. And somebody made a custom map where instead of you building the buildings, the game would build the little units for you, and then you had a hero, and your hero would go off and fight other heroes, and people loved this. It was, somebody did this kind of at home, out of their own time, and it caught on like wildfire, and it spawned a whole new genre of games. So, the level creation, all of these steps, they're so important on their own. The fact that you could form a new genre of game just by editing a level, just by doing it in your basement, kind of speaks to that. So we've talked about the 3D stuff, and we talked about what you paint on the 3D stuff, your images, your textures. There are also multimedia assets. And so within your game, you may have movies and cutscenes, cinematic sequences in your game. Outside of your game, you're going to have promotional materials. You're going to have someone that puts all these things together. You're also going to have music and composition. And this is actually a very sort of oversaturated field of game design. It's actually very easy and very cheap to find amazing music for games. And traditionally, games have been really underappreciated as an art form. Just in general, but especially with their music. Back in the old 8 to 16-bit game days, all the games were MIDI music. They were these annoying tinny tunes, and things have really come a long way. So, I have no idea if you guys are going to be able to hear this or not, but can anyone identify this song? Yes, it is. This is not maybe the way we remember the music, but this is the way that we're starting to experience it with the games today. Sadly, I'm going to cut that one short. And I'm going to play another quick clip for you. Can anyone actually hear that? Does anyone know this song? This is from Civilization 4. This was the first video game piece of music to win a Grammy Award. Yep. They actually they snuck it by the Grammy folks. They didn't realize until afterwards that it was actually from a video game. So So games are coming into their own. People are starting to realize that video games really do have art within them. That video games are beautiful, that the music in them is beautiful, and that they're worth appreciating on their own. And this has really taken a long time for people to catch on to. So we have the music. We also have sound effects. And sound effects are done a lot of different ways. Typically people will either go out into the field and record real things, the sound of a jet, the sound of a car, or they'll sit in the studio and they'll try and figure out what does the sound of a tree scraping against a house really sound like, and how can I emulate that with spoons? A lot of the way that sounds are created for games, if you saw them, you would have no idea that was actually going on. I mean, we're talking silly putty and cutlery and beams of wood and all kinds of things. And as with music, this is becoming easier and easier to find through your games. There are libraries that have been created for free that you can use in any game. So these are the parts of the gaming that have really gotten easier. Acting recently has started to enter games. We saw earlier, there's Tiger Woods, his eponymous series of games showing us his swing. So we have this motion capture where we take real actors showing off their skills, but far more important is voice acting in games. And though you probably won't recognize them, a significant number of celebrities have started voicing games. These games are very big dollar games. Call of Duty, as I mentioned, made $1 billion in a day. We used to think that World of Warcraft was huge because it made $200 million a month. I mean, that was an insane amount of money. But there are games today that are even bigger than that. So yes, this is Charlie Sheen. And so we see a lot of appreciation in Hollywood and in the broader audiences that yes, games are serious, that it's not going to ruin my career if I appear in a game. This is actually a leapfrog to bigger and better things. And we've kind of danced around it, but there really is no getting around programming. It's scary for a lot of people. Programming is one of those concepts that at first is hard to kind of wrap your head around. It's kind of like learning a new language, but it's also kind of like having a really fussy 2-year-old, right? And this 2-year-old is going to do exactly what you tell them to do. And you think, okay, that's great, but no, you tell them, hey, go and pick up all the stuff in your room. They waddle on in there, and they pick up each item, and then they place it back exactly where it was before, because that's what you asked them to do. And that's kind of what you have to wrap your head around, is computers are really kind of dumb. We have to hold their hand and tell them exactly what we want to do, and getting into that frame of mind of, okay, what actually needs to happen and in what order? First, you need to go into your room, and you need to look around, you need to determine if there's space for your toys in the box, and so on and so forth. But programming is so important. I mean, it really is what makes games tick. So we start off with the sort of lowest level, the platforming system. Everything you make games for, these are the consoles, but certainly there's PCs, there's mobile. Over here we have a Rift, which is a heads-up display. We have a holographic display over there. We have giant kiosk touchscreens. We have all kinds of stuff. They each come with their own cool things and their own drawbacks. They have different hardware. They have different ways of interacting. Is it a controller? Is it a Kinect where you move your hand and the game sees it? Is it a mouse and keyboard? So you have to understand those things, and you have to program it for the system you're going to be on. AI is kind of a fun one. Anytime you're going to interact with a computer in a game, you need some sort of artificial intelligence so that computer feels like a real person playing against you. So in the top left here, we have a basic pathfinding algorithm called A*. And if anyone's curious, I can give you more information. But a lot of these things are, they've been optimized over centuries, even before they were games, these algorithms for how we move through the world. What's the shortest path between 2 points? In the top right, we have Halo. And in this game, you work as part of a squad, and your opposing force is part of a squad. So not only do you have to move around the map and attack the player, but the enemy squads have to work together. They have to understand that they have a leader, and they have to protect that leader. And so this is actually starting to get pretty complex. And not only do you have troops on the ground, but you have air support, and you have vehicles, and trying to make all these things work together. And again, in the bottom right, this is from Civilization, which we mentioned earlier with that soundtrack. And in Civilization is a strategy game. So not only do we have these battles that we have to coordinate, but the computer also has to understand what it means to build an empire, what it means to feed its people, what the player is doing and how the computer should respond. is what you're doing by building an outpost here threatening to me or not. So again, a whole new level. The bottom left is from Left 4 Dead. This was Valve, and it's a zombie survival game. And this is kind of a different kind of AI. This is not controlling the enemies, this is actually controlling the player experience. So it's a little hard to see, but we have three sort of graphs here. And the top one is where you're going to encounter enemies. So each of those white dots is an enemy, and they have some green and red and other colored dots for different kinds of bosses. So just the level as it's experienced. And then they've gone through and they've said, well, we're going to take that player experience and we're going to determine the player's level of stress. So the more they take damage, the more enemies are running after them and they're fleeing for higher ground. We're going to count those things as stress. We're going to try and understand where the player's at in their head. And when things get a little too stressful, we have those red bars, we've kind of redlined, then we'll relax. We'll actually get rid of some enemies, we'll give you a little break. We'll try and keep you in that optimum place of happiness. So moving right along, Angry Birds is basically, Angry Birds is almost not even a game. It's a 2D physics simulator. You got a couple boxes, you throw a bird, but people love this. They have played hours and hours and hours of this game. They've actually combined played more Angry Birds, if you treat it as one person, one collective experience, more Angry Birds than the history of humanity has been alive on this earth. Yeah, it's a lot of birds. A couple other pieces, your back-end server architecture. Anytime you want to do multiplayer games, how do you keep everybody in sync? How do you save all of the information in the state of the game? Gameplay programming, how does your character interact? How do the mechanics of the game work? How does the game actually run? Sometimes people design their own game engine from the ground up. These are three of the major ones: CryEngine, Unreal, and Unity. So people might create their own engine to run these games. That's sort of the powerhouse for the games. They might use one that already exists, but add their own custom features to it. And so we've gotten through all of the programming and the less sexy stuff, but the still important stuff, production. We don't want to forget that. And we don't want to forget our wonderful friends in quality assurance, who are by far the least appreciated in the game world. If you talk to a little kid about game design, they think, ooh, I really want to play games for a living. But really, when you get in and you actually test a game, you will be playing that same game for 8 weeks, for 12 hours a day, and every time you find a bug, you'll have to file a report, and you will hate that game. You will never buy it when it comes out. Just something to keep in mind. And then all the other important parts of production. Project management, we have to keep everything on schedule. Everything depends on everything else. We can't test this feature until this other feature is in place, and we have to have a playable demo for such and such expo, and so that's kind of the person that keeps everything flowing and understands what order things need to get up to so we don't get into bottlenecks. We have accounts, the money's got to come in, the money's got to be spent, somebody's got to manage that. The sales and marketing. So we want our game to be successful, so we actually have to go out and find some players and get some publicity and all that kind of stuff. Licensing. A lot of games are based on existing content, and likewise, a lot of games use pieces of software developed by other people. Almost no games are built entirely from scratch. I might use an audio library from this person, and I might use an original piece of artwork from this other person, and I might base it on a story. So you got to manage all that stuff. And then the producer, the publishing, actually going through all the hoops, especially if you're doing a console. They're going to make you run all kinds of tests and try out your hardware in different localizations, different languages, and all these steps that just have to be done. And when you finish that, you have a game. And it's a wonderful feeling. All right, it's not quite done yet. But I am going to move quickly through some of the remaining stuff. So we have some time for the fun toys that we've brought. And also, Tom's going to say a few words to you. So I'd like to talk to you about why games are so important. And obviously, they're important as an industry in and of themselves. They're a huge market. They're worth $50 to $70 billion. I mean, that right there says we should be taking these seriously. But as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of what I do isn't what you would call traditional games. And I think the way we define games really is starting to change, and it's really getting a lot broader. Because what is a game? It's a world maybe with some rules. Hopefully you have fun. It responds to your input. It's interactive. That can describe a lot of things. And I hope you guys are kind of starting to take games seriously in and of themselves, but let's talk about some serious uses for games. So let's talk about the places games are having impacts, for instance, on training. There are a number of reasons that you would use games for training. And the idea would be, say you want to train a firefighter. The firefighter, you have a game, you show up at the scene of a fire, what do? Maybe you have 4 options. I can check the perimeter, I can open the front door, I can, do these actions. You do the wrong one, the house blows up, your team dies. Okay, you've learned. The reason that you would use training for games, one of them would be that the training is very expensive on its own. So the Army is so interested in games. They love games because for them to actually put you in a tank and train you on a tank, it costs them $10,000 a mile to train you in a tank. It is so bloody expensive. And then they gotta fly you out to where the training is, and you've got ammunition and arms and things that you use. Much simpler to put someone in a tank simulator in a nice room in their hometown. As I mentioned earlier with the firefighters, there are some things that are inherently risky, and there are some things that just cannot be done. We cannot blow up a city. We ethically cannot do that. We can't even blow up a building most times. But we can do that in games, absolutely. We can simulate a terrorist attack, and we can have you run around with emergency responders, coordinators, and try and figure out how to respond to that. So a lot of the places we've seen this traditionally have been the military and things like emergency response. We're actually starting to see a lot of training in the medical industry. They've been very interested because cadavers are expensive, and again, it's unethical to just cut a healthy person up and start poking through their organs. So games are great for letting you see what happens, let you make mistakes as a doctor. And next up, a little bit more with the medical industry. We talked about medical training, but there are so many more things that can be done with games. And this movie right here is, this is the way that games are helping burn victims. Getting a burn is awful. They have to graft skin onto your body. And not only do they have to do that, but they have to constantly stretch that skin to make sure that it grows right. So if you can imagine having a significant portion of your body burned, and then they're going to keep moving that part of your body and stretching it, it's agony. It's terrible. And so what they found is that if we take these people in these situations and we stick them in a game, so we stick a headset or we stick a monitor in front of them, and we have them play, maybe we'll get to it in just a second here, we have them play a game where they're in a nice cold world, where they're running around throwing snowballs at penguins and everything is icy. It tricks the brain. It reduces the pain. And not just we ask them and they say, yeah, I feel better, but we've actually taken brain scans. And it actually it reduces the inflammation in your body, it reduces the centers in your brain that register pain. So it's really kind of been a remarkable thing. We can also use games in a scientific sense. So this is a game called Fold It. Has anyone here heard of Fold It? A couple of you, not too many. Fold It is an interesting concept. Fold It, we have phage repressors and peptides and things. So this is a game about molecules, and it's trying to understand molecules. And the thing about molecules is they're very complex, and they can wiggle around and move in different ways. They come in different orientations. And it's very hard to simulate this, because if I have a long chain like this and I move one piece, it affects all the other pieces. So there's not some small possible number of combinations. You think that, okay, there's 4 possibilities times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4, and you go through that a bunch of times, you get into billions and trillions and quadrillions of possible combinations of states for this molecule. And so what they decided was computers are very bad at this kind of simulation. All they know is to dumbly go through and try A and then try B and then try C. People can shortcut this because people can see the whole thing, they can look at it holistically. And so they turned protein folding into a game, into a puzzle game. And it's actually a cooperative and competitive game. So you're trying to get scores and you're trying to play against other players. And I'll just forward ahead a little bit so you can kind of see him starting to rack up some score. So you set up basically elastic bands and then try and wiggle the protein into a certain shape. And this is actually, they discovered some new things about HIV that they've actually then gone and made medicines from, all from this game. It's actually had real impacts on the world. Games have been kind of a game changer, to borrow a phrase, for virtual experiences. And for me, the one that's closest to my heart is architecture. And the idea, we'll show you this Oculus Rift. It's basically a glorified pair of ski goggles that takes you into another world. When you wear these, you are in that space. You're not looking at the space on a monitor. You can actually look around, and something that you could never do in this drawing is you can stick on a virtual reality display and get a feel for how low is the ceiling in the building, and how does the light feel, how does the layout feel. So you can take this and say, you know, the beams in this house really are too low. I want to raise them. And you can do this before the house is even built, which is something you've never been able to do before. So there's not really a good word that is stuck for all of these non-game applications. We don't really have one single word to describe them. The way you make them is largely the same as a game. It really is. A game is pushing a bunch of polygons to a screen in an interactive way. And that's what all these things are. You use a game engine for doing this simulation, for doing this simulation, you can build all of these things in a game engine as if it was a game. And these are not just emerging technologies. You know, this is not where the technology is going to be. This is where the technology is. The only thing that's left is for it to grow to where this becomes commonplace, to where games are a part of your daily life. We've seen games affecting psychology. We've learned about the way that we tick as people through games. We've learned about things like flow, how to keep a person not too challenged that they get frustrated, but not too easy that they get bored. Keep them in this nice, narrow middle to where they're constantly just the right amount of challenged. We've learned how to reward people. We will click many, many times in a game to get a little badge that says you are awesome, or to go from level 2 to level 3. It's a number. It's meaningless. You know, it's a picture that you get, but it's that feeling of reward that I have changed from what I was before. I was level 2, and now I am level 3, and that means something to me. That's something that we've tried to take out into the world. And I think that we're going to see games continue to grow. We're going to see traditional games becoming better and better, higher fidelity. We're going to see games affect us medically. We're going to see games affect us in the way that we interact with the world and in the way we interact with each other. And games are going to teach us about ourselves. So I'd like to kind of wrap up the talk proper there. And I want to give some time. We're still good, Tom?
Yeah.
Awesome. Just a little bit of time to talk about one of the reasons we're holding this talk tonight. We want to do a game course through DaVinci, and I want to kind of gauge interest. So I'll start the QA in a couple of minutes, but first let me mention kind of what we want to accomplish. These courses are designed to take an absolute beginner, so you don't even have to have played a game, and at the end, hopefully, you're on the path to a full-time entry-level position in the gaming industry. So this is sort of a 0 to you're there kind of course. And we're thinking about doing it this summer. We want to know if folks are interested. We're going to talk about all of the roles that we went through this evening. So you'll get a chance to try your hand at texture design and at 3D animation. I want to focus on the programming aspect. And I understand that folks are going to come in having never programmed. We're going to start you off simple. We'll go from there. But programming has become such an important part of our lives. I mean, it's used in every industry. And I want to give you guys the maximum chance to find a job. I went out and I talked to game designers in Colorado and beyond, and university, they told me, yeah, we like a lot of skills, but really you got to have the programming. So we're going to focus on all of those things. It's going to be heavily project focused. So again, when I talk to people out in the field, by and large, they said, you know, it's great that you know how to do these things, but I want you to show me. I want you to show me games that you've made. I want you to show me that you can actually go through from start to finish and not abandon a project and have a game at the end. So we're going to spend a good portion, learn a skill, make a game out of it. Learn a skill, hopefully make a better game the second time. Build up a portfolio. And we're going to try and sort of cover the demands from the industry. So get you guys, people I've talked to have said it's important that people know various repositories, Subversion and Git and things like that, which may mean nothing to you, but not things that you would necessarily think are important, but we're going to try and get you guys less on the theory and more on the actual design of games. All right, well, thank you all.